Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thank you as always for joining us. Much going on, more disclosures on January 6th coming, new developments related to election integrity, some great news there, plus another lawsuit by Judicial Watch about the censorship crisis. First up, though, is the news that Speaker McCarthy has made available videos of the January 6th disturbance to Fox News, specifically Tucker Carlson. Now, I don't know what the details are of Tucker's access to these videos, but as you may recall, Judicial Watch had been suing for these records for some time, and it's been kind of just sitting in the courts as the Pelosi Congress, now the McCarthy Congress, had objected to our asking for the records, suggesting, that they weren't public records. Even if they weren't important enough to release. And then even taking a step further back, that they had sovereign immunity, and therefore they should be able to withhold these records from us and be immune from lawsuit under the common law right of public access to government information. And we now know that, according to what Tucker is saying and what's been reported with as it relates to Tucker's access to these videos, there's 41,000 hours of video, which doesn't really make sense to me that there's that much, but I don't know, maybe there is. Judicial Watch also knows separately there's at least 271 emails at issue as well, and I don't think Tucker's asked for or has gotten access to them. So great news that the Speaker took these steps to make this material available to Tucker Carlson. Reportedly, they'll be more broadly available to other media, maybe even Judicial Watch later. But the big question is whether they're going to be releasable under law and whether Speaker McCarthy will authorize their release pursuant to our specific request. And that is what I would encourage him to do. So I appreciate the fact that McCarthy has taken this big step towards transparency, but I would encourage him to do more. And so the more that Tucker can get out, the better. But we're asking for all the records that possibly could be available under law, and that way everyone can look at them and the public will have a better understanding of the January 6th incident. So, the left's position on January 6th is that anyone who questioned the 2020 election or anyone who has questions and wants to protect election integrity generally should be treated as an insurrectionist, and they're all responsible for any violence that took place that day. When in fact it's probably a lot more complex, and I don't need to tell you that since you're a sensible person likely if you're watching this, is that it was obviously some violence that took place that was wildly inappropriate. Look, we need the full story about what happened on January 6th. And selected videos put out by partisans in the Justice Department or in the Pelosi Rump January 6th committee ain't going to cut it. So if we want to know what happened on January 6th, we need, as the American people, access to all the videos and all the relevant emails and other communications. And until then, no one can draw any conclusions about what happened on January 6th, whether there was incitement, whether police mishandled things, whether it was just truly mob violence with no police incitement, or what some have suggested there were others involved in inciting the violence and causing some of the disturbance to take place. We don't know the answers to much of that because of the inability to gain access to some of the information at the video, in terms of videos and emails and other communications. So this is to me like a straightforward transparency issue. You can't on the one hand say January 6th is the worst day in American history while denying access to basic information about what happened that day. So we applaud Speaker McCarthy doing the right thing here. We encourage him to continue to do the right thing by working with Judicial Watch in our legal case to get these records out under the law. Because the left is going crazy, pretending that releasing these videos is going to incite violence. I mean, don't you love it? Transparency is now violence for the left. Everything they don't like, they want to jail you for, practically speaking, right? If they don't like transparency, you're committing a crime and asking for it. I mean, that's the suggestion here. Speaker McCarthy should not only release the material to Tucker, But to everyone else, as soon as he's able, there's a lot of video to be analyzed, and I think the law requires it. And I hope it's not the Speaker's position that they're immune from transparency laws as well. I hope not. I mean, for instance, the U.S. Capitol Police is the only police force in the country, I think, that has no laws governing its transparency or requiring transparency. So you can ask for records from the Capitol Hill Police. They may give you those records, but it's only because of their graciousness and the goodness of their heart. There's no law requiring it. That's not true for any other police force in America. Why does Congress have this special police force that's immune from transparency and accountability? So, those are the issues here, and I hope Speaker McCarthy confronts them more head on than he has to date. But in the meantime, he should be applauded for doing the right thing. But of course, it's Judicial Watch, so we want all the information out there, or as much as possible, under the law. And so our litigation will continue for these January 6th videos and the emails. And the emails could involve emails with Nancy Pelosi and other leaders of Congress that they don't want you to see. And I think it's pretty obvious why they don't want you to see them. As I said, the court has been sitting on this case for a while. The judge that was handling the case was elevated to the appellate court here in D.C., and the case has just been sitting out there for months while waiting for another judge to be assigned our lawsuit. And it just happened, I think, literally this week that it was finally assigned, I think, to a new Biden-appointed judge. So we'll see what happens, but hopefully the case will now proceed and we'll get some resolution one way or another as to whether you, dear fellow American, have the right to see these records under the common law right of public access to government information. So the media is very excited because it's the first anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Obviously, it's a notable historical anniversary, but the media being the media, they are ignoring the elephant in the room, which is the personal corruption of Joe Biden and how it may have played a role in Russia's decision to invade Ukraine. There are two issues, I think, worth highlighting for you that the media won't tell you, but because Judicial Watch is the truth teller, you can rely on us. Number one is that when Putin was looking at what Ukraine was and what should be the reaction to the West of any potential invasion, I'm sure he made the calculation based on looking at what Ukraine's involvement was in the effort to undo the Trump presidency, that it was a plaything for the West's liberals, meaning the Biden gang and folks like that. You may recall the Ukrainian government was anti-Trump, tried to intervene in our election, and Joe Biden famously highlighted how he protected his son. Well, he didn't highlight that he didn't admit this, but this was the effect of what he did, was he got this key prosecutor fired by threatening to withhold aid. And he famously admitted to that on a video. And of course, that had the benefit of protecting him from negative press and potentially legal liability as he was considering his next run for office, which was obviously the presidency. So if you're Putin, you must look at Ukraine and say, boy, they're nothing but a plaything for the United States, so they're not a real government. Now, I'm not saying that's a correct presumption that Putin should make, but that's the sort of analysis I would think he would bring to bear when he's making decisions in terms of decisions to invade Ukraine. And then secondly, when he's making a decision to invade Ukraine, he's probably looking at the leadership of the United States, his chief adversary. And this is a leadership that's been compromised as a result of corruption, not only in Ukraine, but in Russia. So not only does Putin know that Biden is on the take because some of the money came from Russia, and Burisma was a Russia-friendly company, and they know about what was going on in Ukraine. But of course, Putin knows he's on the take. So if you're Putin, obviously that would be a factor in your decision to invade Ukraine, that Biden is weak because he's corrupt. And obviously there are cognitive issues that are self-evident that I guess only foreign leaders are supposed to notice, but the American media is supposed to ignore. So those are the issues that are out there. on the year anniversary of Ukraine. Now, Judicial Watch has been in the forefront of trying to get to some of the truths related to the Ukraine scandals. For instance, we had actually, it's almost 2 years ago, uncovered how the Obama administration knew that Biden's issues with Ukraine were an issue in terms of Russia relations. They were complaining when Biden went to Ukraine just before Trump became president that the Russian local media was pushing this, basically trolling. I think the language he used, they were trolling Biden on corruption because they knew about Burisma. And the State Department official wrote the ambassador to Ukraine at the time, the infamous Ambassador Yovanovitch, saying that Burisma is the gift that keeps on giving. So you had this acknowledgement uncovered by Judicial Watch documents showing that even the Obama administration was aware that this was an issue for U.S. foreign policy as it relates to Russia and Ukraine. And then, of course, the other big issue, and the left, and I don't know, there was this kind of crazed support for Ukraine that was supposed to require us to not to say anything that might hurt that support of Ukraine, because it's all pro-Russian if you raise any questions about the way the war has been conducted. And one of the big issues were these biolabs in Ukraine. Now, the Russians were highlighting these biolabs probably in a dishonest way, but it doesn't mean that Americans can't honestly look to see, well, what's the risk of these biolabs in Ukraine that the U.S. had been helping to maintain? And now, of course, to ask that question was seen by the left as a sin. But Judicial Watch wasn't cowed by these leftist authoritarians who don't want you to question your government. Judicial Watch asked for, I don't know if we ended up suing for them, but we did get records confirming that the U.S. was maintaining these biolabs, helping them be maintained. It's been going on for well over 20 years now, I think. And some of the biolabs contained anthrax, so we were helping manage anthrax stores in Ukraine and pathogens. Now, I don't know about you. Why are we helping Ukraine maintain those stores of those dangerous substances? I don't understand it. Maybe you do. Maybe you can tell me why on earth we're letting the Ukrainians run these labs with our money with pathogens that could harm people in ways that I don't want to imagine. Shut it all down. That's my view. So that's what Judicial Watch has been doing. And, it doesn't mean that, and I kind of run hot and cold. And, we fall somewhere in the middle on the debate, at least I do, on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think this war could have been ended a lot sooner if Biden was strong as opposed to weak and supported Ukraine much more strongly initially. And if he was going to send weapons, he should have sent them in the beginning rather than parcel them out. It's kind of like a kid going shopping with their parents and they run out of money and they're constantly coming back to their parents for money saying, I got to get this now. And the parents are, all right, I'll give it to you. And that's what we've been doing with the weapon systems for Ukraine. I don't understand the strategic logic for it. And, militarily, I think it just extends the war longer than it otherwise would continue. So I want the war to end soon, hopefully with fewer casualties. But the way the Biden administration's running things, they see it as a government program. That's my perception. You just keep on putting money into it with no rhyme or reason as to what the end point's going to be. And remember, this is an administration that assumed the Russians were to take over Kyiv in like days, and that didn't obviously happen. And since then, they haven't gotten their act together. So, happy anniversary, Ukraine. Good luck relying on the Biden administration. Well, I have some great news for you. Judicial Watch has confirmed through communications with Los Angeles County that the county has removed 1.2 million ineligible names from their voter rolls as a result of Judicial Watch's litigation and federal court settlement that LA County and the state of California entered into a few years ago. Now, this litigation was filed under the National Voter Registration Act, which is maybe as the Motor Voter Bill. It was passed during the Clinton administration. And it was designed by the left to get the government to register everybody. And the sop to Republicans and those concerned about having duplicate registrations as a result of the government registering people time and time again was that the states had to take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. Guess which part of the law the left enforced? The registration part. They didn't want the rolls to be clean because, in my view, they want the extra names there as a cushion if they need to steal elections if necessary. And, you know, that's my blunt analysis of it. And so thankfully, the law allows for private enforcement. The Justice Department, I think, only filed 1 or 2 lawsuits in its entire history on this key law to make sure that election rolls are clean. And certainly it's more important than ever, given the over-reliance on mail-in balloting that requires ballots to go out to people. You want them to have rolls that are clean, or as clean can reasonably be. So in Los Angeles and in California, the rolls were generally a mess when we sued. I think our lawsuit was initiated back in 2017, so 5 years ago. No, was it 5 years ago? What is this? What year is this? 2003? 6 years ago. And we noted at the time, I think, that there was 20% of the rolls were dirty. And California, it turns out, hadn't cleaned their rolls. And I don't want to get into detail why they didn't, other than they didn't think they needed to under the law, for 20 years until Judicial Watch came around. And so we sued on behalf of registered voters and our friends at the Election Integrity Project California, which is a public interest group also involved in monitoring California's election rolls. And under the terms of the settlement agreement, Los Angeles County sent almost 1.6 million address confirmations in 2019 to voters listed as, quote, inactive on its voter rolls. Under the law, voters who do not respond to the notices and who do not vote in the following 2 federal elections must be removed from the voter rolls. The settlement also required an update to the state's online MVRA manual, which is the manual that the counties used, to make it clear that ineligible names must be removed and to notify each California county they are obliged to do this. So what happened was we began this process in 2019, and essentially the 2 federal elections have passed. So folks who haven't responded have been removed from the rolls, and it's 1.2 million names. So if you don't respond and you don't vote, it means it doesn't mean you can never register and re-register or vote subsequently, but it means you need to re-register and vote. Otherwise, your name gets dropped from the rolls. And why is it important that the rolls be clean and that they shouldn't have millions of inactive registrants? Because even if you're inactive, you can show up and vote or request a ballot and such. And if you know people are moved away, obviously that's a temptation. That's a pool from which fraudsters can draw if they want to engage in voter fraud. And that's why there's this law requiring the states to have clean election rolls. Now, I guess I shouldn't have to explain that to you, since you instinctively know dirty election rolls can mean dirty elections. The left hates the idea that Judicial Watch has been doing this. And you can be sure they're going to be very upset with the news that we disclosed as the result of this settlement and this process, for which we had to be patient for the time to pass. 1.2 million names were removed from 1 county in California. And so what was happening under the settlement agreement, Los Angeles County was sending us email reports telling us about what was going on. And so we had an email report from January 2022. Maybe we can throw this up on the screen. And it kind of, because you got to look at both to understand the numbers here. The number of active registrations as of January 2022 was 5.438 million, so more or less. The total inactives on that file was 1.672, and it included 317,000 names who had just been, just placed on that list in the last year, at least in 2021 or just before 2022. The number of individuals who hadn't voted in 2 consecutive elections as of 2022 was 1.2 million. 1,207,613 to be exact. There were 814,000 names of people who hadn't voted in 6 years, at least. 685,000 names hadn't voted in 4 consecutive federal elections. So that's 8 years plus. 5 or more consecutive general federal elections, at least half of the names on that list hadn't voted in 10 years or more. So we got that number, right? And then they sent us a follow-up email this year dated, which just came in on the 15th. So what's today? The 23rd? So it just came in last week. So the number of active registrations it's gone up a little bit, 5.625, up from 5.4 last year. The number of registrations in the inactive file dropped to 529,000. Now, just because they're inactive doesn't mean they can be removed under the law, as I've described. The number of registrations placed in the inactive file of the last year, it's dropped 210,000. And these are the big numbers. The number of registrations continuously on Los Angeles' inactive file or showing no voting-related activity for 2 consecutive elections, 0. 3 consecutive elections, 0. 4 consecutive elections, 0. 5 or more consecutive general federal elections, 0. What a victory that is. 1.2 million names have been cleaned off from the rolls. This is a tremendous victory for the rule of law. It wasn't done by the Justice Department. It was done through Judicial Watch. Your support for Judicial Watch has led to a massive cleanup of the rolls in California that will have statewide, potentially nationwide implications in the sense that those elections will be at less risk for voter fraud as a result of this mass cleanup. And I tell you, there's been nothing like this ever done by the federal government. And I guarantee you they'll never do anything like it in the future, unless there's a radical change of leadership. And I tell you, even under the Trump administration, they weren't terribly interested in doing much here. So this is a tremendous victory for the rule of law. As I said, it wouldn't have happened without your support. Our legal team, led by Bob Popper on the election integrity side, has done yeoman's work here. Russ Nobile is on our side too. Eric Lee has done great work. Our 3 attorneys who have been working on this case. This has just been a tremendous effort that took 5-6 years of careful work, litigation, and then being on them to make sure that the settlement was enforced. Now, I know many of you are saying, well, how do you know this is true? Well, I mean, it was sent to us pursuant to a federal court settlement. So, I mean, they'd be really putting themselves at some risk if they're lying about the numbers here. And we have other ways of validating these numbers as well. So trust us on that. But I want you to take a step further back. So this isn't the only positive thing that's happened, because you may recall I told you how in New York City we settled a lawsuit after New York City removed, thanks to Judicial Watch, 440,000 names. And you may recall last year, North Carolina, we ended a lawsuit there because North Carolina, after we sued, removed 430,000 names. So over the last year, Judicial Watch has confirmed over 2 million ineligible voters have been removed from voting rolls in New York, North Carolina, and California, thanks to our historic litigation efforts. If I could applaud Judicial Watch, it would be appropriate. Great work by Judicial Watch. Don't you agree? And there's more to be done. We've had previous successes in making sure that Maryland Democrats couldn't rig elections by gerrymandering seats in a way to ensure that only Democrats got elected, something completely illegal under state law. We have an ongoing lawsuit in Illinois challenging Illinois' position that they should be able to, and they have been counting ballots that arrive by mail up to 2 weeks after Election Day, including ballots that haven't been postmarked. We have an ongoing civil rights lawsuit there. And of course, we've got ongoing litigation in Pennsylvania and Colorado to require those states and certain counties in those states to clean up their rolls as the law requires. So we ain't done yet. And you can bet as the new numbers come in of voter registration details for following up the 2022 elections, Judicial Watch will be looking at those details very carefully to decide where and whether to sue or warn people that they need to clean up the rolls. Because at this point, just us warning people gets them to clean up the rolls. That's happened in state after state. It happened in Florida. I know in Pennsylvania, one county, after we sent them a letter saying, what's going on here? You haven't been removing names as you were supposed to. They immediately removed 69,000 names. So I tell you, if Judicial Watch wasn't doing this, our voting rolls would be a mess, an absolute mess. And I told you we settled with California and New York City. Now, they're not exactly the friendliest states and localities when it comes to Judicial Watch on election policy matters, don't you think? But, you know, kudos to them for settling, seeing what the writing on the wall was in terms of the law, and not wasting time and money and just getting the work done and following the darn law. Again, without the help of the Justice Department. So this is further confirmation that Judicial Watch is your watchdog in Washington. It's your Justice Department. I know we're not literally the Justice Department, but when it comes to enforcing the rule of law, we put the Justice Department to shame, certainly on election matter. So it's just great work, great news, and it's going to be hard to match the success of this litigation, but we're going to try. And you can bet, given the left's attack on free elections, fair elections and clean elections by opposing voter ID, by dragging their feet on cleaning up the rolls, through this outrageous ballot harvesting, through unsupervised voting, meaning vote by mail, which is an anathema, in my view, to free and fair elections. There's a lot more work to be done. And Judicial Watch will continue to be the national leader in defense of free and fair elections under law. Well, the other big crisis is the government censorship targeting Americans. The left liberal Biden administration, and frankly, the deep state under the Trump administration, has been caught red-handed censoring Americans by potentially the millions. This happened before the 2020 election, and it's continuing to this day. It was election interference then. It's election interference now. They're not only intervening in elections and election matters now, but they're also interfering in your right for information or to information about COVID and vaccines, and your right to discuss issues of controversy. And the Twitter files released a remarkable display of corporate citizenship by Elon Musk. His release of those Twitter files have exposed how the FBI, the CIA, the State Department, the Pentagon, Department of Homeland Security, the White House, all the king's horses and all the king's men were involved in pushing Twitter and other social media platforms to censor you, dear Americans. And they weren't really focused on censoring liberals. They were focused on censoring Trump, his supporters, and trying to make it easier for Biden to get elected and then to stay elected. I mean, let's be blunt about it. I mean, we know what the policy issues that they're pretending to be concerned about, but anything that gets in the way of their political agenda, they're willing to abuse the powers of government to censor by going through these big tech companies. And Judicial Watch hasn't been sitting on our laurels on this issue. We've been suing to get access to the information about what's been going on in terms of the government censorship. We've had several lawsuits that have emerged just alone out of the Twitter files. And one thing you need to remember is that on one hand, you've got the Twitter files being released, and Elon Musk has largely, I think, pulled back a lot of the censorship. But on the other hand, you've had the Facebook and Google just continue full throttle with the censorship and suppression. And I know it's still happening because Judicial Watch continues to be victimized by it. As I've told you before, if I say the wrong thing on elections, YouTube will take it down. If I even mention COVID, there it is, I mentioned it. Now there's going to be a label potentially put there by Facebook and or Google on YouTube saying, Fitton said something about COVID. Here's something you might want to go look at. which suggests what I'm saying is wrong. And then if you go to share it on Facebook, they have a warning email that pops up or a message that pops up saying, you sure you want to share this garbage? It doesn't literally say that, but that's the implication. Further suppressing the content. Now, Twitter isn't doing that anymore, but it's still a major issue for Facebook and YouTube users and other internet users and these other social media platforms, which are also enforcing left-wing ideological and partisan censorship of conservatives. It hasn't stopped. And Twitter, relatively speaking, doesn't have that many followers compared to Facebook and YouTube. I mean, Facebook has 1 billion plus followers, I think, right? Twitter has maybe a few 100 million at most. So it's a fraction of the targeting or those being victimized on Facebook by censorship. So the government would use these third-party intermediaries who would also go to the social media platforms to get material taken down at the behest of the government. So they would also communicate with social media directly, and then they would use these other cutouts to also communicate on their behalf, the government would. And so this was exposed in congressional hearings, through Judicial Watch separate investigations, and through the Twitter files. And Judicial Watch has been in the forefront of getting more information and suing about these issues. We just sued, for instance, the Department of Homeland Security for records on this massive election censorship. We had asked for records related to the work of this so-called Election Integrity Partnership that was, again, a way station for illicit, unconstitutional censorship of American citizens. We filed the lawsuit after DHS refused to comply with an October 27th, 2022 request. So we had asked for these records now, 5-6 months ago, and we still haven't gotten the records. So, and it wasn't like we were asking for a lot of emails here. There can't be that many emails. And if there are, then there's a bigger problem than we might think. So we wanted for all communications, direct messages, records about this election integrity partnership sent via this Atlassian Jira platform. Is it Jira or Jira? J-I-R-A. I don't know how it's pronounced. Between any official or employee of the Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency, which was this new agency that was stood up that became a hotbed of anti-Trump, anti-First Amendment activism. And any member, officer, employee, or representative of any of the following: the Election Integrity Partnership, the University of Washington Center for an Informed Public, another anti-free speech entity, Stanford University's Internet Observatory, again, an anti-free speech entity, the Center for Internet Security, the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the National Association of Secretaries of State, which is also running through, as I'll just talk about later, censorship requests, the National Association of State Election Directors, Graphica, which is a notoriously anti-free speech entity, the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensics Research Laboratory. These are all like lengthy words or titles for left-wing censorship group. Basically, everything I've talked to you about, other than the government agencies, are just left-wing censorship groups. And of course, we want to know about their communications with the big tech companies. And so what is this platform we're concerned about? Well, they had portals that they were sending in, secret backdoor portals that they were sending requests in, tickets in to what they call tickets. If you familiar, if you work and you had a computer problem, you go to your help desk for your computer problem, your computer help desk folks, they give you a ticket, right? This is the ticket they pursue to track your request. And that's what they were doing with censorship. But they also had this JIRA program that was kind of like Slack. I've never used Slack, but I guess it's kind of like an IM type of messaging system that allows you to instantaneously communicate and surreptitiously communicate quite easily with those in the system. So they were using this system to have near instantaneous censorship discussions about folks and targeting them. And based on representations that the Election Integrity Partnership made, the federal government, social media companies, and all these other groups were communicating privately through this messaging system. So that's what this request is about. you know, it's what we ask for. We often have to ask for the documents 6 ways to Sunday to ensure that we get everything. And Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who is a new member of Congress, who the left hates because she's A, a female, B, a conservative, and C, effective, revealed information that this system was being used to censor Americans. As she noted in her questioning of Twitter employees a few weeks ago, or former Twitter employees a few weeks ago, these entities were all communicating on a private cloud server known as Jira. Now, the screenshot behind her showed an example of one of thousands of examples of them, Twitter specifically, exchanging communications on this system with this government entity that I'm talking about, run out of the Department of Homeland Security and these other groups. And they were communicating not to talk about the weather, but to censor people. So this came up in the matter of court testimony. Now, the Elon Musk Twitter files are the tip of the iceberg, as I've talked about, as the federal government ran a massive secret censorship op against the American people that went well beyond just Twitter. That the DHS is hiding these censorship records in violation of FOIA law shows the agency still has something to hide. Now, as I said, this is just one of many lawsuits that we filed on this issue. We just sued DHS recently for that same agency's communications with the social media platforms about censoring and elevating news reports, specifically that New York Post report on the Hunter Biden laptop. We also sued for the Justice Department for records of the FBI's communications about the Hunter laptop and other matters, because the FBI was, they had, I think, 2 full offices doing nothing but censoring Americans. We sued the Secretary of State of California directly for Judicial Watch because the Secretary of State of California persuaded YouTube to take down a Judicial Watch video featuring yours truly, where I was talking about the dirty voting rolls in California and my concerns about mass mail-in ballots. Perfectly legitimate discussion. And YouTube censored it at the request of this government entity out in California. So we sued a federal civil rights lawsuit. So I tell you, it's not just information we're looking for accountability. This censorship issue is important to the future of our nation because if we can't communicate and gain access to information on this system, this internet system, which has been such a revolutionary step forward in access, providing access to the public about what the world is up to and the way government operates, I tell you, you know, we might as well just shut the country down. On the other hand, they're so desperate to censor us because we're so effective online and they can't control all the information, so they're desperate to do anything they can, including violating the Constitution, to control it. I mean, it used to be back in the day, and many of you can remember that day, when there were 3 networks, 2 or 3 major newspapers or news wires, and that was it. And that was the narrative. Now there are all these other competing narratives, and it's just glorious. And for those of us who want to protect the rule of law, expose what the government's up to in terms of corruption, and just have the ability to have a say in the direction of our nation and participate in the conversation. And the left hates that. And they've been trying to put the genie in the bottle, and they're growing more and more desperate with this illegal censorship in order to do so. And so we're proud to be in the forefront of fighting for you, because this isn't just about Judicial Watch's rights or Donald Trump's rights. This is about your right to, even if you aren't censored directly, if you can't see something that I sent you or post for you, you're being censored. If you can't see something Donald Trump posts for you, you're being censored. If you can't see something your friend posts for you, you're being censored. So you, fellow American, are as much a victim as Donald Trump is in these censorship wars. So we're going to keep on fighting. So I encourage you to support Judicial Watch. You can see from this update that Judicial Watch is doing the Lord's work in terms of defending the rule of law in elections, helping your elections be cleaner, helping protect your First Amendment rights, helping hold the government accountable to the rule of law, helping defend the national security by exposing corruption that undermines it. There's nothing that we're not doing in terms of trying to protect our precious nation and educate the American people about what they can do to preserve our republic. So I encourage you to go to our website at judicialwatch.org, click on the donate button, and there are many other ways to support Judicial Watch as well, and not only with your prayers, but also get the word out about our work. Share the documents I'm talking about, share the lawsuits I'm talking about, educate your fellow Americans about what we're talking about. Join our movement and join our cause, and I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.